7 rounds of depleted uranium tearing through your chest isn't a heroic feeling. It doesn't happen in slow motion, and there is no triumphant soundtrack playing in the background. It feels like getting kicked by a runaway freight train while someone pours liquid nitrogen directly into your lungs. Cole didn't know the scrawny kid huddled in the trash-strewn alley was the sole surviving heir to the largest interstellar armada in the Orion Spur. He just knew she was terrified. Sometimes, being human means doing something completely suicidal simply because it's right. Cole Decker rubbed the back of his neck, feeling the thick grit of industrial lubricant and cold sweat caked deep into his skin. 14 hours of maneuvering heavy cargo mechs on the orbital docks of Transit Hub. 4 left a man entirely numb. He didn't want a drink at the local cantina. He didn't want the hollow company of the lower-level crowds. He just wanted his cramped, damp hab unit, a hot shower that would probably run out of water in 2 minutes, and a solid 8 hours of dreamless unconsciousness. The artificial rain started precisely as he crossed into Sector 4. It always fell at exactly 2200 station time. It was cold clinging to his heavy canvas work jacket and smelled faintly of copper and venting ozone. Cole pulled his collar up against the chill, keeping his head down, his heavy steel-toed boots splashing through the oily puddles, reflecting the flickering neon signs above. The lower levels of Hub 4 were a dumping ground. It was a shadowy neon-lit purgatory where smugglers, desperate refugees, and exhausted laborers rubbed shoulders in a constant low-level state of hostility. You didn't make eye contact down here. You minded your own business. You survived. Then he heard it. It was a sharp, sudden intake of breath, quickly stifled, followed immediately by the unmistakable high-pitched whine of a plasma battery charging to lethal capacity. Cole stopped in his tracks. His heavy boots went still on the wet grating. He looked down the narrow, garbage-choked gap between a steaming noodle stand and a massive atmospheric venting pipe. 3 men stood in the shadows. They were broad, heavily augmented, and wearing the reinforced tactical long coats favored by corporate hitters and high-end bounty hunters. And a girl. She looked small, fragile, huddled aggressively against the damp, rusted bulkheads of the station wall. She wore an oversized, filthy jacket that swallowed her frame. Her face was obscured by a deeply pulled hood, but Cole could see her violently shaking. Cole wasn't a hero. He was 36 years old, honorably discharged from a planetary defense force nobody remembered, and currently suffering from chronic back pain. Heroes died young, bleeding out in the dark corners of the outer rim. He was just a guy trying to make rent and afford real meat on Tuesdays. The smartest thing he could do, the only thing he should do, was keep walking. One of the hitters raised a heavy slug thrower. It wasn't a suppression stunner. It was a massive, lethal kinetic weapon designed to punch through body armor and vehicle chassis alike. "Target confirmed," the lead hitter stated. The voice was heavily synthesized, flat-stripped of all humanity. "Eradication sequence initiated." The girl didn't scream. She didn't beg for her life. She just squeezed her eyes shut, pulled her knees to her chest, and threw her small hands up in a pathetic, instinctual defense against the inevitable. Cole's tired brain didn't even have the time to process the risk calculus. His body moved on an old, deeply buried infantry instinct that had never truly been switched off. The heavy solid steel hydrospanner he carried in his tool belt was suddenly in his right hand, the metal cold and familiar against his calloused palm. He stepped into the alley. "Hey," Cole barked. His voice was a harsh rasp of exhaust fumes and cheap tobacco. The 3 hitters turned. it was a fatal tactical error. In the claustrophobic, debris-filled quarters of the alley, their armored long coats and long-barreled heavy weapons made them slow and clumsy. Cole didn't hesitate. He swung the heavy hydro-spanner like a bat, smashing it into the first hitter's augmented temple. The man's optics sparked, and he collapsed onto the rain-soaked deck. The second hitter tried to raise his gun, but Cole grabbed the barrel, forcing it upward as it fired. The deafening blast tore into the metal above showering sparks. Cole drove a knee into the man's ribs, then slammed the spanner into his collarbone, dropping him in agony. But there was a third. Cole spun on the slick deck. The last hitter had kept his distance. Calm and steady, he leveled his weapon with a clear shot. The weapon wasn't aimed at Cole. It was aimed right at the shivering girl. Cole didn't think. Thought required time, and time had run out. He threw himself entirely sideways, launching his heavy frame through the air, putting his body squarely between the gaping black barrel of the weapon and the girl. The world erupted into fire and noise. The first bullet hit his right shoulder, violently spinning him in midair. It felt like a sledgehammer strike, instantly shattering the bone and sending a shockwave of white-hot agony down his arm. 2. His side. A burning, tearing invasion that violently stole the breath from his lungs and collapsed his ribcage inward. 3-4. The heavy rounds punched through his thick canvas work jacket like it was wet tissue paper, tearing viciously into his abdomen. Cole fell. He hit the wet deck plates, hard, splashing in a freezing puddle of dirty water engine oil and his own rapidly pooling blood. 5, 6, 7. The hitter kept firing clinically, ensuring the kill. The final rounds hammered directly into Cole's chest and left thigh, pinning him to the floor with sheer kinetic force. The deafening rhythmic roar of the gun finally ceased. Cole lay flat on his back. The artificial rain was falling steadily on his face. It felt surprisingly cold. The true agonizing pain hadn't fully registered in his brain yet. There was just a heavy, wet, suffocating numbness rapidly spreading from his core. He couldn't breathe. Every single time he tried to draw air, his chest made a horrible, wet, rattling sound. He heard heavy footsteps. The heavy boots were walking away. The hitter assessed the collateral damage, assumed the primary target was neutralized beneath the human meat shield, and retreated into the shadows. Cole turned his head. It was an agonizing, monumental effort that made the edges of his vision flare with static. The girl was crawling slowly toward him. Her oversized hood had fallen back. She wasn't human. Her skin was a pale, luminescent blue, smooth and shimmering slightly in the neon light. Her eyes were solid, vibrant gold, utterly devoid of pupils, and currently wide with a terror that transcended any species barrier. "Why?" she whispered. Her voice was highly musical, almost harmonic, but heavily trembling with shock. She pressed her small, glowing hands against his ruined chest, desperately trying to stop the catastrophic bleeding. There was simply too much of it. It was mixing with the station rain running in dark, thick rivers into the rusted drainage grates. Cole tried to speak. He wanted to tell her to run, to get out of Sector 4 before reinforcements arrived, to hide. But his mouth only tasted of heavy copper and ash. He looked at her small hands glowing faintly against the dark crimson soaking his shirt. She looked so young. Then the flickering neon lights of the alley began to dim. The drumming sound of the rain faded into an echoing silence. The biting cold vanished, replaced by an absolute, heavy, welcoming darkness. Cole let out one last rattling breath, stared into the golden eyes of the alien girl, and let the void drag him under. There were no dreams in the dark. There was only a strange, pervasive humming sensation. It was a deep vibration that settled into the very marrow of his bones, vibrating at a frequency that felt both ancient and entirely foreign to human physiology. Sometimes suspended in the blackness, he thought he heard voices, soft, echoing voices, speaking in overlapping harmonic choruses, sounding like a grand choir singing under thousands of feet of deep ocean water. Then came the fire. It started as an infinitesimal pinprick deep in his chest, radiating slowly outward. It felt like someone was meticulously pouring molten glass directly into his veins. Cole wanted to scream, to thrash wildly against the burning, suffocating agony, but his body was a prisoner to absolute paralysis. He was locked inside a cage of his own broken meat, forced to endure the cellular reconstruction. The burning slowly, agonizingly subsided over what felt like centuries, eventually replaced by a dull, heavy, throbbing ache. The humming grew steadily louder, shifting from a physical vibration to an audible rhythmic sound. The steady, reassuring shh, click of a high-end respiratory ventilation unit. Cole slowly opened his eyes. The light was utterly blinding. It was pure, sterile, and perfectly white. It didn't flicker or hum like the cheap halogen bulbs on Hub 4. It was a seamless, omnipresent glow emanating directly from the softly curved walls of a room that looked like the hollowed-out inside of a massive pearl. He blinked heavily, trying to clear the thick, crusty grit from his vision. He was lying flat on a bed that seemed to perfectly actively contour to the exact shape of his spine. The sheets covering him were woven from a synthetic material softer and lighter than anything he had ever touched. He tried to move his right arm. It felt incredibly heavy, wrapped entirely in thick, rigid synthetic medical banding. "Steady yourself," a calm voice instructed. Cole painstakingly turned his head. A man was standing perfectly still near a complex holographic diagnostic console, or at least something roughly shaped like a man. He wore a crisp, immaculate white uniform with a high collar. His skin was the same pale, luminescent blue as the girl in the alley, but heavily lined with age and experience. His eyes were solid gold, currently observing Cole with the clinical, detached fascination of a scientist examining a miraculous lab specimen. "Where?" Cole started. His voice was a dry, broken croak. His throat felt like it had been violently scrubbed with industrial sandpaper. The figure approached the bedside, holding a small silver metallic cup. "Drink, slowly. Your vocal cords were severely lacerated by a fragmented section of your own rib cage. The microscopic bioweavers have fully repaired the localized tissue, but there will be extensive residual discomfort for several cycles." Cole didn't care about bioweavers or localized tissue. He blindly reached out and took the cup. The liquid inside was viscous, freezing cold, overly sweet, and coated his raw throat like a miraculous medical balm. "Where am I?" Cole asked again, his voice slightly stronger, sounding more like his usual gravelly self. "You are currently aboard the Royal Dreadnought Righteous Dawn." The doctor stated his tone perfectly even. "My true name is a frequency unpronounceable to your mammalian tongue, but your translation matrix will register me as Dr. Collins. You have been entirely unconscious for 14 standard cycles, roughly 16 of your Earth days." Cole stared at him, his tired brain struggling to process the words. "A dreadnought I was on Hub 4, in the rain. I was heading home." You died on Hub 4. Dr. Collins corrected smoothly, tapping a command into the floating hologram. Clinical irreversible brain death occurred exactly 3 minutes and 40 seconds after you sustained 7 heavy kinetic projectile impacts. Your liver, your left lung, and your right ventricle were entirely pulverized by the depleted uranium cores. Cole looked down at his chest. The white bandages were thick and constricting, but there was no sharp pain. Just a deep, profound tightness, as if his chest cavity was filled with wet cement. "If I'm actually dead, this is a very boring, sterile afterlife," Cole muttered, letting his head fall back into the impossibly soft pillow. Dr. Collins didn't smile. "Your species possesses a truly remarkable, almost illogical, biological stubbornness. That resilience, combined with the immediate application of a localized temporal stasis field by the Royal Guardsmen who arrived mere moments after your assailant fled the scene, preserved your degrading neural pathways. We have spent the last 2 weeks painstakingly rebuilding your entire organic structure from the cellular level upward." Cole closed his eyes, fighting through the thick medical haze to piece together the violently fractured memories. The cold artificial rain, the rusted alleyway, the 3 corporate hitters, the girl. "The kid!" Cole suddenly gasped, his eyes snapping open as a spike of adrenaline hit his newly forged heart. "The little girl in the alley, did they get her?" Dr. Collins paused his work at the console. He slowly turned to look at Cole. For the first time since Cole had woken up, a flicker of something deeply resembling profound awe crossed the alien's stoic, aged features. "You intentionally threw your unarmored body into the direct firing path of a professional execution squad," Dr. Collins said, speaking slowly, emphasizing every word. "You absorbed 7 lethal kinetic rounds meant for another. You experienced total biological failure. And your very first inquiry upon returning from the void is for her safety. Just answer the damn question, Doc," Cole growled, struggling uselessly to sit up against the medical restraints. Dr. Collins stepped forward and gently but firmly pushed Cole's shoulders back down into the mattress. "She is unharmed. She is completely, entirely unharmed, thanks exclusively to you." Cole let out a long, shuddering breath, his tense muscles relaxing against the bed. "Good. That's good." He didn't know why he cared so deeply. He didn't know her name. He didn't owe her anything. But the haunting thought of that terrified, shivering kid dying in a filthy, blood-soaked alley had been the only tangible thing pushing him forward through the dark. "Mr. Decker," Dr. Collins said softly, pulling up a massive holographic display that suddenly hovered directly over the bed. It showed a slow-spinning, highly detailed 3D model of Cole's body, highlighting the newly repaired organs and bones in a soft, pulsing green light. "Do you have absolutely any concept of who it is you saved?" "A kid," Cole said bluntly. "Some street rat who happened to be in the wrong place at the worst possible time." "That street rat," Dr. Collins said, his voice dropping into a tone of deep reverence, "is Her Royal Highness Lucy, the sole surviving heir to the Aurelian Empire, the supreme sovereign of 312 inhabited star systems, and the absolute commander of the military fleet, currently maintaining strict orbital lockdown over this entire sector." Cole stared blankly at Dr. Collins. He waited in silence for the punchline. He waited for the alien to laugh, or for his dockside buddies to jump out and reveal this was an elaborate, expensive, narcotic-induced prank. But the alien's face remained completely terrifyingly serious. "You're messing with me," Cole whispered. "I assure you, Mr. Decker, I am entirely incapable of deception regarding the royal bloodline. Cole let his heavy head fall back against the pillow, staring up at the seamless pearl ceiling. A princess. He had literally taken 7 heavy-caliber bullets for an alien princess. He was a low-level, overworked dock loader who couldn't even afford decent boots, and he had just violently inserted himself into the absolute pinnacle of interstellar geopolitics. "Great," Cole muttered bitterly, rubbing his eyes with his heavy bandaged hand. "Just my absolute typical luck." 3 days later, the medical restraints were removed, and Cole was finally allowed to walk. He felt fundamentally different. He was heavier, but drastically stronger. Dr. Collins casually explained that the microscopic bioweavers had aggressively reinforced his entire skeletal structure with a hyperdense carbon weave lattice to overcompensate for the massive kinetic tissue damage. His rib cage was practically bulletproof now. He was essentially a localized cyborg wrapped neatly in a scarred human shell. They gave him clothes to wear. Not his stained, oily canvas jacket and worn steel-toed boots. They provided him with soft, dark charcoal trousers and a perfectly fitted, high-collared tunic made of a dark material that breathed like summer cotton, but felt as strong and smooth as liquid silk. "The princess has requested your presence," Dr. Collins announced, stepping silently into the gleaming medical bay. Cole simply nodded. He was losing his mind staring at the perfectly clean, pearl-white walls. He swung his legs over the side of the bed and followed the aged alien out of the room. Stepping out of the medical bay into the main corridor was like stepping directly into an ancient, hyper-advanced cathedral. The ceilings were impossibly dizzyingly high, steeply arched, and supported by massive seamless pillars of polished midnight obsidian. Soft ambient blue light emanated directly from the flawless floor plates. Heavily armored guards stood at rigid, perfect intervals along the walls, tall, deeply imposing Aurelians, clad in gleaming interlocking silver armor, holding heavy energy halberds that hummed with lethal potential. As Cole walked past them, his heavy boots echoing softly in the vast space, every single guard forcefully brought their weapon across their chest in a sharp salute and bowed their heads deeply. Cole kept his eyes locked straight ahead, his jaw tight, feeling deeply, inherently uncomfortable. He was just a guy, a nobody from Hub 4. He wasn't used to respect, let alone military reverence. He was used to red-faced foremen screaming at him over the intercom to move the cargo containers faster. Dr. Collins led him to a set of massive, heavily engraved double doors at the far end of the long corridor. They parted silently, retreating into the walls to reveal a room that made the grand corridor look like a claustrophobic storage closet. It was the supreme observation deck. The entire far wall, spanning nearly 200 feet across, was a single uninterrupted sheet of transparent hyperdense armor, offering a sweeping, breathtaking, unobstructed view of deep space. Cole walked slowly toward the glass, his breath catching painfully in his carbon-laced throat. Transit Hub 4 was a tiny, rusted, ugly speck of brown and dull gray in the far distance. Surrounding it, completely filling the black void of space as far as his enhanced eyes could see, was an armada. Massive predatory warships, sleek and terrifyingly angular, painted in midnight blue and gleaming silver. Heavy cruisers, fast attack destroyers, and dreadnoughts the size of small moons. There were thousands of them. They hung motionless in the cold vacuum like a dormant world-ending storm, their massive sublight engines burning with a quiet, menacing blue fire. "They came looking for me," a soft voice said. Cole turned away from the glass. Standing near a long, curved tactical table in the center of the vast room was the girl. She looked absolutely nothing like the terrified, shivering kid in the dirty alley. She was dressed in an incredibly elegant, flowing gown of interwoven silver and deep royal blue. A delicate, complex circlet of glowing white metal rested perfectly on her brow. Her golden eyes were bright, sharply intelligent, and carried a heavy, ancient weight that no child of any species should ever have to bear. But as she looked up and truly saw Cole standing there, breathing and whole, the heavy royal facade instantly cracked. The stoic ruler vanished, and she was just a kid again. "Cole," she said, her voice breaking slightly. "Hey, kid," Cole replied, offering a small, deeply awkward wave. She moved rapidly, entirely, ignoring royal decorum, crossing the massive distance between them in seconds and throwing her arms tightly around his waist, burying her face into his tunic. Cole froze stiff, his hands hovering uselessly in the air. He looked awkwardly over her shoulder at Dr. Collins, who simply offered a warm, highly uncharacteristic smile and discreetly turned his back to give them privacy. Cole slowly, tentatively rested a heavy, calloused hand on the top of her head. "You're actually alive," she whispered into his chest. "Yeah, well, it apparently takes a hell of a lot more than a few kinetic slugs to keep me down for good," he said, forcing a dry, raspy chuckle. She pulled back slowly, looking up at him with immense gratitude. "My Uncle Arthur orchestrated the hit. He funded a rogue mercenary faction. He heavily calculated that if he eliminated me quietly on a neutral transit hub, the Empire would seamlessly pass to him by default. He planned for everything, but he didn't account for you. I really don't think anyone anywhere ever accounts for a tired, underpaid dock worker with a steel wrench," Cole said honestly. "You saved the entire Empire, Cole Decker," she said, her voice regaining its strength. She stepped back and gestured broadly to the massive window, to the thousands of heavily armed warships waiting in the dark. When the Grand Fleet learned that the princess had been ambushed, and that a human, a fragile mammalian species we barely interact with, willingly sacrificed his own life to shield her, it triggered an immediate massive cultural shift across our worlds. Cole frowned, crossing his arms over his chest. Cultural shift. What does that mean? Before she could answer, the massive doors behind them slid open again. An older, deeply scarred Aurelian walked into the observation deck. He wore an immaculate, perfectly tailored military uniform adorned with dozens of glowing tactical medals and heavy rank insignias. He was exceptionally tall, broad-shouldered, and carried a suffocating aura of absolute, unquestionable authority. This was a man whose mere whisper commanded the fate of entire planets. "Admiral Charles," Lucy said, utilizing the translation matrix for Cole's benefit. "Supreme Commander of the Royal Armada." The Admiral stopped 3 feet away from Cole. He looked down at the human. He intensely studied the simple charcoal tunic, the harsh, ugly white scars peeking out from the collar. He looked at the perfectly ordinary man who had done what an entire legion of elite royal guards had spectacularly failed to do. Cole quickly braced himself. He expected a stiff military handshake, maybe a shiny commemorative medal, a patronizing speech, and a one-way shuttle ticket back to the grueling shifts of Hub 4. Instead, Admiral Charles took a deliberate step backward. He reached to his hip and smoothly drew a massive glowing ceremonial sword from its scabbard with a sharp echoing snick. Then the Supreme Commander of the largest, most lethal military fleet in the Orion Spur dropped heavily to one knee. He drove the glowing point of the sword directly into the polished obsidian floor and bowed his head deeply. Cole stepped back entirely alarmed, his hands raised in surrender. "Whoa, hey pal, you really don't need to do—" Dr. Collins, standing quietly by the door, also dropped rigidly to one knee, bowing his head. Cole looked frantically at Lucy. She was beaming bright golden tears welling happily in her alien eyes. "In our oldest, most sacred culture," Lucy explained softly, her voice echoing in the silent room, "blood willingly spilled in defense of the royal line makes you absolute kin. You are no longer Cole Decker, the laborer of Transit Hub 4. Admiral Charles spoke, his deep, resonant voice booming across the quiet observation deck. "We pledge our blades, our ships, and our stars strictly to the shield of the crown. We kneel to you, Lord Cole." Cole stood perfectly still in the massive room. He looked at the kneeling, towering alien commander. He looked at the brilliant doctor bowing in the corner. He looked out the massive window at the thousands of warships hanging silently in the endless void, waiting for a command. He slowly reached up and rubbed the back of his neck, the old tired habit dying incredibly hard. "Well," Cole muttered softly to himself, a wry, cynical smile pulling at the corner of his mouth. "I guess I don't have to go back to my shift on Tuesday." Cole stared at the small, delicate glass resting on his desk. It was filled with a steaming black liquid that Dr. Collins swore possessed the exact chemical equivalent of Earth coffee. Cole reached out with his right hand to pick it up. Crack! The heavy, hyper-dense crystal shattered instantly. Scalding black liquid splashed over his knuckles, dripping steadily onto the polished obsidian floor. Cole didn't feel the heat. He didn't feel the sharp edges of the glass biting into his palm. He just felt a deep, exhausting frustration. He sighed, wiping his hand on a gray cloth. The bioweavers had rebuilt him perfectly, but they hadn't given him the user manual for a carbon-laced skeleton. Every movement required conscious, exhausting restraint. He was a bulldozer trapped in a china shop. The heavy doors to his private quarters hissed open. Admiral Charles stood in the threshold, looking entirely out of place, without a glowing ceremonial sword pointed at the ground. "Lord Cole!" Charles boomed, his massive frame filling the doorway. "Just Cole, Admiral," Cole replied flatly, tossing the damp cloth onto the desk. "I spent 20 years loading freight. If you call me Lord again, I'm going to assume you're mocking me." Charles frowned, his golden eyes narrowing in slight confusion, but he gave a stiff nod. "Very well, Cole. The tactical assembly requires your presence. The princess insists you attend." Cole followed the towering alien through the labyrinthine corridors of the righteous dawn. The ambient blue lighting felt cold. Guards snapped to attention as he passed. He hated it. He hated the silence, the reverence, the heavy expectation hanging in the sterile air. He missed the chaotic, noisy grit of the docks. He missed knowing exactly what his job was. The Central Command Center was a massive circular amphitheater. At its heart sat a massive holographic projection table displaying a highly detailed, rotating map of the local star systems. Dozens of high-ranking Aurelian officers, clad in pristine silver and blue uniforms, murmured quietly among themselves. The moment Cole stepped into the room, absolute silence fell. Lucy stood at the head of the table. She looked tired. The heavy silver circlet on her brow seemed to physically weigh her down. But when she saw Cole, a fraction of the tension left her narrow shoulders. "Report Admiral D," Lucy commanded, her voice ringing clear and authoritative. Charles stepped forward, tapping a sequence into the console. The holographic map zoomed in violently on a cluster of red dots congregating near a dense asteroid field. Arthur's forces have ceased masking their signatures, Charles stated grimly. He has officially secured the loyalty of the 3rd and 7th Defense Fleets. Furthermore, he has hired the Black Iron Syndicate, a heavily militarized mercenary outfit from the outer fringes. They currently hold a fortified position at the edge of the sector, completely blockading the primary hyperlane to the capital world. An older, heavily decorated Aurelian officer across the table spoke up. We possess the numerical advantage. The Grand Fleet can simply overwhelm the blockade with a sustained saturated plasma bombardment and annihilate the 3 civilian trade stations caught in the crossfire, Lucy countered sharply. Arthur chose that specific bottleneck because he knows I will not authorize a full-scale bombardment on my own people. He is forcing a stalemate. Every day we wait, more fringe systems declare neutrality, doubting my ability to secure the throne. The war room descended into a flurry of overlapping tactical arguments. Complex algorithms were discussed. Symmetrical fleet formations were debated. They talked about political optics, collateral damage, calculus, and long-term economic impacts. Cole leaned heavily against the edge of the tactical table, watching the glowing red dots. He listened to the pristine, highly educated officers argue in circles. They were treating this like a grand, civilized game of chess. "You're thinking too big," Cole said. His voice wasn't loud, but the harsh, gravelly human rasp cut through the harmonic alien voices like a rusted saw blade. The room fell silent again. Every golden eye turned to look at the human dock worker in the simple charcoal tunic. "I beg your pardon," the older officer bristled, clearly insulted. Cole pointed a thick, calloused finger at the holographic projection of the massive mercenary blockade. "You're looking at a wall. You're trying to figure out how to knock the whole thing down without making a mess. But Arthur didn't build a wall. He hired one." Lucy leaned forward, her eyes bright. "Explain, Cole." "Mercenaries don't fight for a throne," Cole said bluntly, pulling from years of dealing with dockside syndicates and smugging rings. "They fight for a paycheck. They don't want to die for your uncle. Right now, they feel perfectly safe sitting behind their heavy dreadnoughts, using civilian stations as human or alien shields. You don't need a grand fleet battle. You just need to show them they aren't safe." Charles crossed his massive arms. "A precision strike. Decapitate the mercenary leadership." "Exactly," Cole nodded. "Find their flagship. Send a small, heavily armed boarding party directly through the asteroid field where their long-range scanners are blinded by the radiation. Kick the door in, put a gun to the syndicate boss's head, and tell him his contract with Arthur is officially expired." The Aurelian officers stared at him in stunned silence. The tactic was brutally simple, highly aggressive, and lacked any semblance of traditional royal elegance. "It is highly unorthodox," Charles muttered, staring hard at the map. "The radiation field within those asteroids will completely disable our standard energy shields. Any boarding craft would be entirely reliant on raw physical hull armor. It is a suicide run for standard infantry." "Good thing I'm not standard infantry," Cole said. Lucy's head snapped toward him, her face instantly paling. "No, absolutely not. You just recovered. You are the shield of the crown. You belong here on the flagship." Cole looked at her. He saw the same terrified kid from the alley, desperately trying to hold on to the only person who had stepped between her and the dark. "Kid," Cole said softly, ignoring the gasps from the officers at his total lack of honorifics. A shield doesn't do anyone any good if it just sits locked in a display case. Let me do my job. The armory of the Righteous Dawn smelled like ozone and polished metal. Cole stood in the center of the room, rolling his shoulders to test the fit of the armor. It wasn't the gleaming ceremonial silver plate the royal guards wore. He had specifically requested something else. The ship's quartermaster had dug deep into the ancient planetary reserve vaults to find it a heavy, matte black reinforced boarding suit designed for deep space mining operations centuries ago. It was ugly scarred and built to withstand absolute catastrophic pressure. It felt perfectly like home. Charles walked into the armory carrying a long, heavy rectangular case. He set it on a metal bench and popped the latches. Our standard energy halberds require years of specialized martial training, Charles said, his deep voice echoing in the quiet room. I cross-referenced human kinetic weaponry against our current armories. This is a Class 4 breaching cannon. It fires a solid, magnetically accelerated tungsten slug. It is highly inaccurate at long range, and the localized recoil is traditionally enough to shatter an Aurelian's shoulder. Cole reached into the case and pulled the weapon out. It was a massive, brutal piece of machinery, all squared edges and heavy barrels. It weighed at least 60 pounds. To his carbon-laced skeleton, it felt like a standard pump-action shotgun. It's perfect, Cole racked the charging handle. The mechanical clack-clack was loud enough to rattle the overhead lights. 20 minutes later, Cole strapped into the cramped, dark interior of a heavily armored stealth shuttle. Sitting across from him were 6 of Charles's most elite operatives. They were massive, silent, and heavily armored in dark gray. They didn't speak to Cole, but the way they watched him with a quiet, intense reverence made his skin crawl. They weren't looking at a commander. They were looking at a religious artifact that had suddenly decided to pick up a gun. The shuttle violently shuddered as it detached from the dreadnought and plunged into the chaotic swirl of the asteroid field. Entering radiation zone, the pilot's voice crackled over the internal comms. Energy shields are down. We are flying on raw iron, boys. Brace for turbulence. The ride was a nightmare. The shuttle bucked and violently slammed against smaller space debris, the heavy hull groaning in protest. Cole just closed his eyes, focusing on the heavy, steady thud of his reinforced heart. He wasn't afraid of dying. He had already done that. He was only afraid of failing the kid. Target acquired, the pilot announced sharply. Black Iron flagship. They are entirely blind to our approach. Initiating magnetic breach. A massive, bone-rattling crash shook the shuttle as it violently slammed into the side of the mercenary dreadnought. The magnetic clamps engaged with a heavy metallic shriek. Breach in 3, 2, 1. The front hatch of the shuttle blew outward in a shower of white-hot sparks and venting oxygen. Cole didn't wait for the smoke to clear. He charged out of the shuttle, the heavy tungsten cannon raised. They breached directly into a massive, poorly lit cargo bay. Sirens were blaring. Dozens of heavily augmented mercenaries, a brutal mix of varying alien species in mismatched scavenged armor, were scrambling frantically for their weapons. Cole didn't hesitate. He pulled the trigger. The roar of the breaching cannon was deafening. The massive tungsten slug tore across the room, hitting a heavily armored mercenary directly in the chest. The kinetic force lifted the massive alien completely off his feet, hurling him backward into a stack of metal crates that collapsed in a deafening crash. "Push!" Cole roared, pumping the heavy action of the cannon. The 6 Aurelian elites flooded out behind him, their energy rifles firing in disciplined, lethal bursts of blue plasma. But they naturally formed up directly behind Cole. He was the spearhead. A massive reptilian mercenary stepped out from behind a heavy transport vehicle, hoisting a rotary plasma cannon. Before the barrels could even begin to spin, Cole closed the distance with terrifying cyborg-enhanced speed. He didn't shoot. He drove the heavy steel stock of his cannon directly into the mercenary's jaw with the force of a hydraulic press. The bone shattered instantly, and the massive alien crumpled. Cole kept moving. He was a machine of pure, unrefined kinetic violence. He didn't fight with the elegant dancing martial arts of the Aurelian guards. He fought like a man trying to survive a bar fight in the lowest levels of Hub 4. He used his shoulders, his boots, the heavy walls of the corridor. When a mercenary managed to land a glancing plasma bolt against his chest, the heavy mining armor scorched, but Cole barely felt the heat. His carbon-laced ribs absorbed the shock entirely. They tore through the lower decks like a localized hurricane. The mercenaries were hardened killers, but they were entirely unprepared for the sheer brutal momentum of the human leading the charge. They reached the massive reinforced blast doors of the Syndicate boss's command bridge. "They have locked it down," one of the elite guards stated, checking a wrist-mounted scanner. 10-inch Durasteel. We need a plasma cutter. It will take 10 minutes. "We don't have 10 minutes, Cole growled. He stepped up to the massive blast doors. He jammed the barrel of his breaching cannon directly against the seam where the 2 heavy doors met. He pulled the trigger. The tungsten slug shattered against the hyper-dense metal, blowing a massive, jagged crater into the steel. He pumped the action, fired again, pumped, fired. He emptied the entire heavy magazine directly into the central locking mechanism, reducing the intricate alien machinery to a smoking pile of twisted slag. Cole tossed the empty cannon to the deck. He jammed his heavily armored, carbon-reinforced hands directly into the jagged, smoking hole he had just created. He planted his heavy boots against the deck plating. He closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and pulled. The muscles in his back screamed. The biosynthetic enhancements whined in high-pitched protest. The heavy 10-inch Durasteel doors groaned loudly, bending under an immense, impossible physical pressure. With a deafening metallic shriek, Cole violently ripped the heavy blast doors apart, throwing them wide open. He stepped onto the command bridge, breathing heavily, smoke rolling off his scorched armor. The Black Iron Syndicate boss, a massive scarred brute covered in cybernetic implants, sat frozen in his command chair, his heavy sidearm hanging loosely in his hand. He stared at the human who had just physically torn open a vault door with his bare hands. Cole walked slowly across the silent bridge. He stopped directly in front of the boss, leaning in close. "Arthur's check just bounced," Cole whispered, his voice a harsh, terrifying rasp. "Take your ships, leave this system, now." The boss looked at Cole's burning, relentless eyes. He looked at the ruined blast doors. He slowly, deliberately placed his weapon on the console and nodded. The trip back to the righteous dawn was dead silent. The 6 elite operatives didn't look at Cole with quiet reverence anymore. They looked at him with a primal, deeply ingrained fear. He had broken the fundamental rules of their civilized, calculated warfare. He had brought the bloody, desperate grit of the lower docks directly to the stars, and the sheer brutality of it terrified them. Cole sat slumped in the hard transport seat, staring at his hands. His knuckles were bruised purple, heavily swollen beneath the scorched matte black gauntlets. His chest ached with a dull, throbbing intensity. The bio-weavers were likely working overtime to repair the microfractures in his synthetic lattice. He didn't feel like a hero. He just felt incredibly, deeply tired. When the shuttle docked and the ramp lowered into the flagship's main hangar, Cole expected a quiet medical detail. Instead, he walked out to find the hangar bay completely packed. Thousands of Aurelian crew members, pilots, and armored guards stood in perfectly ordered ranks. As Cole's heavy scuffed boots hit the polished deck, a deafening sound erupted. It wasn't a cheer. It was the synchronized thunderous slam of 1,000 heavy-energy halberds striking the metal floor in absolute unison. Slam. Cole stopped flinching slightly at the noise. Slam. They were honoring him. The human who had just single-handedly broken a system-wide blockade without firing a single ship-to-ship plasma battery. The entire crew bowed their heads, the ambient blue light reflecting off their pristine armor. Cole hated it. He forced himself to keep walking, his face set in a hard, impassive scowl, ignoring the deafening rhythm of the ceremonial salute. He didn't stop until he reached his private quarters. He stripped off the heavy, smoking mining armor, letting the pieces crash carelessly to the obsidian floor. He threw himself onto the massive bed, staring up at the seamless pearl ceiling, desperately wishing for a cheap, lukewarm beer and a noisy ventilation fan. The door chimed softly. "Go away, Admiral," Cole grunted, throwing a heavy forearm over his eyes. The door hissed open. "The Admiral is currently busy rewriting 3 centuries of standard naval doctrine," Lucy's voice said. Cole moved his arm. The princess stood in the doorway, awkwardly holding a small silver tray. On it sat a steaming bowl of something that smelled faintly of roasted root vegetables and heavy salt. "I had the galley attempt a localized translation of human comfort food," Lucy said, stepping inside and letting the heavy doors close behind her. "They called it stew. I cannot guarantee it won't taste like engine coolant." Cole sat up slowly, his joints popping loudly in the quiet room. He took the tray, offering a tired, genuine smile. "Thanks, kid." He took a bite. It tasted like heavily salted mud, but it was warm, and he was starving. He ate it in silence, while Lucy sat carefully on the edge of the bed, her heavy royal facade completely dropped. She just looked like a normal teenager, exhausted by the weight of the universe. "The mercenary fleet broke formation exactly 10 minutes after you left their flagship," she said, quietly, staring at her glowing hands. "They dropped their tracking beacons and jumped entirely out of the sector. The 3rd and 7th Defense Fleets, seeing they were suddenly without heavily armed backup, immediately powered down their weapon systems and transmitted unconditional surrender codes." "Good," Cole chewed the questionable meat. "That means Arthur is out of hired guns." "He is," Lucy nodded. "He only has his personal royal retinue left. He is isolated on the capital world. The war is functionally over." Cole stopped eating. He looked at the girl. He had spent enough time around dockside union bosses and desperate smugglers to know that cornered rats didn't just surrender. They bit. "It's not over," Cole said, his voice dropping its gravelly rasp. "A guy who hires an execution squad to shoot his own niece in an alley doesn't suddenly find a moral compass just because his hired help bailed. What's he doing right now?" Lucy frowned, her golden eyes clouding with confusion. "He requested a parley, an official, universally broadcasted transmission. He wants to negotiate the peaceful transfer of the crown." Cole set the empty silver bowl on the nightstand. The dull ache in his chest was instantly replaced by a sharp, cold spike of adrenaline. "Where?" Cole asked. "The sanctuary of Calum," Lucy answered. "It is an ancient neutral diplomatic station orbiting the gas giant in the neighboring system. Weapons are strictly forbidden by ancient treaty. Energy shields do not function within its walls due to the station's localized dampening fields. It is the safest place in the galaxy." Cole let out a harsh, cynical bark of laughter. "Kid, let me tell you something about safe places. The only time someone insists on meeting somewhere perfectly safe is when they already have a knife hidden under the table." "I have to go, Cole," she said, her voice tightening with sudden royal authority. "If I refuse a peaceful parley, the remaining neutral systems will view me as a warmonger. I have to show them I am a ruler, not just a conqueror." Cole looked at her. She was right, and she knew it. The politics of the situation demanded she walk directly into the snare. He stood up his heavy carbon-laced skeleton, settling into place. "Fine, we go, but we don't play by his rules." The sanctuary of Calum was a massive floating cathedral of white stone and gold filigree, hanging suspended in the violent swirling orange storms of the gas giant below. The righteous dawn hung thousands of miles back, strictly adhering to the ancient diplomatic exclusion zone. Only a single unarmed royal shuttle was permitted to dock. Cole stepped out of the airlock, the heavy gravity of the station pulling comfortably at his boots. He wasn't wearing heavy armor. He wore the simple dark charcoal tunic and trousers of the royal retinue. He walked 2 paces behind Lucy, his eyes scanning every shadowed archway and towering pillar. Admiral Charles walked on her left, visibly uncomfortable without his glowing ceremonial sword. The air inside the sanctuary was incredibly cold and smelled of old dust and ozone. They entered the grand atrium. It was a massive circular room with a floor made entirely of reinforced glass, offering a dizzying, terrifying view of the gas giant storms raging directly beneath their feet. Standing in the center of the room was Arthur. He was a tall, strikingly handsome Aurelian older than Lucy, but lacking the deep, honorable scars of Admiral Charles. He wore an immaculately tailored suit of crimson and gold. 4 massive, heavily augmented guards stood behind him, their faces hidden behind polished silver faceplates. "Lucy," Arthur smiled. It was a cold, perfectly calculated expression. "You look well. The crown suits you." Lucy didn't smile back. "Cut the theatrics, Arthur. You are guilty of high treason. Surrender your royal titles, order your personal guards to stand down, and you will be permitted to live out your days in comfortable exile on the Rim." Arthur let out a soft, patronizing chuckle. He slowly paced around the edge of the glass floor. "Exile," Arthur mused. "Such a brutal word for a child to use. You truly believe you've won, don't you? You think because you found a violent, mindless mammalian pet to terrorize a few mercenaries, you are suddenly fit to rule an empire." Arthur stopped pacing. He locked eyes with Cole. The alien's golden eyes were filled with absolute, unfiltered disgust. "I must admit, human," Arthur sneered. "When I received the report that a dock worker ruined my operation on Hub 4, I was furious. But seeing you here in my brother's clothes, acting as a bodyguard, it's pathetic. You are completely out of your depth." "I don't know, Artie," Cole drawled lazily, shifting his weight. "I tore the door off your syndicate buddy's ship yesterday. Felt pretty deep to me." Arthur's jaw tightened. The smug facade cracked for a fraction of a second. "You are standing in a dampening field. Your localized cybernetics are offline. Your admiral has no energy blade. You are nothing but frail meat in this room. Arthur casually raised his right hand and snapped his fingers. The 4 massive guards behind him stepped forward. They didn't draw energy weapons. The dampening field would have instantly neutralized them. Instead, they reached over their shoulders and drew massive, heavy serrated kinetic broadswords forged from dark steel. They were executioners' weapons designed to butcher unarmored targets. Charles stepped in front of Lucy, his massive fists raising instinctively, but he was unarmed and entirely outmatched by 4 blades of that size. Did you honestly believe I would let an uneducated child take my throne? Arthur sneered, stepping safely behind his armed wall. Kill the admiral, butcher the human, bring the girl to my ship. The 4 guards charged. They were terrifyingly fast, their heavy boots slamming against the glass floor. Cole didn't panic. He had spent his entire life in the shadows of Hub 4, where the only rule was that whoever fought the dirtiest walked away breathing. Arthur was right about one thing: the station's dampening field meant energy weapons wouldn't work. But Arthur clearly didn't understand human engineering. He didn't understand the beautiful primitive simplicity of chemical combustion. Cole reached behind his back, slipping his hand under the long drape of his charcoal tunic. He drew the heavy matte black slug thrower he had stripped off the corporate hitter in the alley 2 weeks ago. He had spent 3 hours in the flagship's armory, meticulously removing the weapon's electronic targeting chips and plasma ignition safeties, converting it entirely back to a crude mechanical firing system. It didn't need a battery. It just needed a spark and gunpowder. Cole leveled the massive kinetic weapon directly at the charging guards and pulled the heavy steel trigger. The explosion in the silent vaulted cathedral was absolutely deafening. The massive kinetic round tore through the chest plate of the lead guard, violently throwing him backward in a spray of blue blood. Arthur flinched violently, his eyes widening in pure, unadulterated shock. The dampening field hadn't stopped the weapon. Cole didn't stop. He stepped forward, putting himself squarely between Lucy and the remaining 3 executioners. His carbon-laced skeleton absorbed the brutal bone-shattering recoil of the heavy pistol with ease. Bang! The second guard's knee completely shattered, dropping him to the glass floor, screaming. The third guard swung his massive serrated sword in a desperate sweeping arc toward Cole's neck. Cole ducked beneath the heavy blade, stepping inside the alien's guard. He drove the heavy steel barrel of the pistol directly up into the guard's jaw and fired. The deafening crack echoed over the raging storms below. The guard collapsed like a marionette with its strings cut. The 4th guard froze. He looked at his 3 butchered comrades, looked at the smoking barrel of the primitive kinetic weapon in the human's hand, and very slowly dropped his heavy sword to the floor. He dropped to his knees, raising his hands in surrender. The room fell terrifyingly silent, save for the heavy, ragged breathing of the wounded executioner. The smell of burnt cordite and copper filled the ancient sterile air. Cole slowly lowered the smoking weapon. He casually stepped over the groaning guard on the floor and walked straight toward Arthur. The regal, arrogant politician was suddenly trembling. He backed away, his pristine crimson suit suddenly looking ridiculous. He backed up until his spine hit the cold stone pillar at the edge of the glass floor. He had no guards. He had no fleet. He was just a terrified man staring down the barrel of a dock worker's stolen gun. Cole stopped inches from Arthur's face. He didn't raise the gun. He just looked the alien dead in the eyes, his human gaze cold, tired, and entirely devoid of mercy. "You're right about one thing, Artie." Cole whispered, his voice a harsh, raspy scrape in the quiet room. "I am out of my depth. I don't know anything about politics or thrones or ancient treaties, but I do know how to take out the trash." Cole slowly turned his head to look back at the young girl standing securely behind Admiral Charles. "Your call, Princess," Cole said. "What do we do with him?" Lucy stepped forward. She didn't walk with the frightened, hurried steps of the girl in the alley, nor did she carry the stiff, rehearsed posture of a pampered royal. She walked like a sovereign. The soft soles of her shoes made no sound against the reinforced glass floor, but her presence commanded the vast ancient room entirely. She stopped beside Cole, looking down at her uncle. Arthur was breathing in short, panicked gasps. The pristine crimson fabric of his suit was soaked in cold sweat. He looked at Lucy, his golden eyes desperately searching for the fragile, easily manipulated niece he had known. He found nothing but cold, absolute resolve. "Lucy!" Arthur rasped, his voice cracking. He raised a shaking hand. "Please, I am your blood. We can rule together. You need an advisor who understands the complexities of the Outer Rim." Lucy looked at the groaning, bleeding executioners writhing on the floor. She looked at the smoking, primitive human weapon resting easily in Cole's massive hand. Then she looked back at Arthur. "You orchestrated the slaughter of my loyalists," Lucy said. Her voice didn't echo. It was quiet, steady, and cut through the massive atrium like a scalpel. "You hired syndicate butchers to blockade civilian trade sectors. You sent kinetic armed assassins into a neutral transit hub to shoot a child in the back." "Politics," Arthur pleaded, pressing himself harder against the stone pillar. "It was the necessary geometry of power. You must understand." "I understand everything," Lucy interrupted. She reached out and violently grabbed the heavy gold insignia pinned to Arthur's lapel. With a sharp tug, she ripped the royal crest from his chest. The heavy fabric tore with a loud, satisfying sound. She dropped the gold pin to the glass floor, letting it shatter against the hyper-dense surface. "You are no longer Arthur of the royal line," she declared, her voice ringing with finality. "You are stripped of your titles, your wealth, and your ships. You will be transferred to the deep surface penal colony on Tartarus Prime. You will spend the rest of your natural life mining heavy isotopes in the dark. You will die nameless." Arthur's face contorted in absolute horror. "Tartarus, no, you cannot. I demand a swift execution. I demand the blade." "You demand nothing." Lucy turned her back on him. She looked at Admiral Charles. "Secure the prisoner, Admiral. Patch up his surviving thugs and throw them in the brig. We are going home." Charles slammed a heavy hand against his unarmored chest in a flawless, bone-rattling salute. "At once, my Empress." Cole didn't say a word. He slowly engaged the heavy mechanical safety of his stolen slug thrower and tucked it back beneath his charcoal tunic. He looked at Arthur, who had collapsed into a pathetic weeping heap on the cold glass floor, and felt absolutely nothing. No pity, no triumph. Just the dull, satisfying closure of a grueling shift finally coming to an end. The adrenaline suddenly plummeted. The moment Cole's heavy boots hit the docking ramp of the Righteous Dawn, the physical toll of the last 48 hours violently crashed into him. His vision blurred, swimming with static and dark spots. The dull ache in his chest flared into a searing white-hot agony. He stumbled, his heavy carbon-laced frame swaying dangerously. He didn't hit the deck. two massive elite operatives caught him instantly hoisting his arms over their heavy armored shoulders. "Medical Bay!" Charles roared, his booming voice echoing down the pristine corridors. "Move now!" Cole faded in and out of consciousness. He smelled ozone. He smelled the sterile, sweet scent of the bio-weavers. He heard the panicked, harmonic shouting of Aurelian medics. When he finally opened his eyes, the blinding white light of the pearl-shaped medical bay greeted him. Dr. Collins stood beside the bed, holding a glowing diagnostic tablet. The aged alien looked exhausted. Deep, dark purple rings heavily underlined his golden eyes. "You are a catastrophic nightmare for my blood pressure, Mr. Decker," Collins said flatly, not looking up from his screen. "Nice to see you too, Doc," Cole rasped. His throat felt like a desert. "How bad is it this time?" "You manually decoupled a 10-inch Durasteel vault door using localized physical leverage." Collins sighed, finally lowering the tablet. "You created hundreds of micro-fissures in your synthetic bone lattice. You subsequently absorbed the unmitigated kinetic recoil of a primitive, non-dampened slug thrower 3 separate times. Your right arm is currently held together exclusively by stubbornness and medical adhesive." "But I'll live," Cole stated. It wasn't a question. "Regrettably, yes," Collins deadpanned, though a faint, warm smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "You are restricted to this bed for 6 standard cycles. If you attempt to leave, I will personally sedate you with enough tranquilizer to fell a heavy transport beast." Cole let his head sink into the impossibly soft pillow. He didn't want to fight it. He was done. The monsters were gone. The kid was safe. "Doc?" Cole asked softly as the alien turned to leave. "Yes, Cole. Can I get a glass of water?" "Just water. No weird sweet stuff." Collins nodded. "I will see what I can synthesize." 4 months later. The artificial rain of Hub 4 was a distant, faded memory. Cole stood on the massive sweeping balcony of the Royal Palace on Aurelia Prime. The air here was perfectly temperate, smelling faintly of blooming night jasmine and clean ozone. Below him, the capital city stretched out in a dizzying array of glowing silver spires and sprawling bioluminescent gardens. He wasn't wearing a charcoal tunic anymore. He wore a tailored high-collared jacket woven from a dark ballistic weave fabric. It was functional heavy and lacked any of the excessive gold filigree the royal court favored. A custom-built, heavily magnetized holster rested comfortably against his right thigh, holding a brand-new, terrifyingly sleek kinetic slug thrower that Admiral Charles's engineers had built specifically to his ridiculous human specifications. He took a sip from his heavy ceramic mug. Black coffee. Authentic Earth coffee imported at an extortionate galactic markup that he still felt guilty about. The heavy glass doors behind him slid open. Lucy walked onto the balcony. She wore the heavy crown of the Empress now. It was a massive, intricate construct of glowing white metal that seemed far too large for her head, but she carried it with effortless grace. "You skipped the Planetary Defense Council meeting," Lucy said, stepping up to the balcony railing beside him. "I don't do council meetings, kid." Cole took another sip of his coffee. "I don't know anything about orbital taxation or hyperspace logistics. I leave that to Charles and the politicians." "You are the Lord Commander of the Vanguard," Lucy pointed out, leaning her elbows on the rail. "You have a seat at the table. A very large, very expensive seat." "I'm a glorified bouncer," Cole corrected her. He had refused the ceremonial titles. He had refused a fleet command. Instead, he had asked Charles for 50 of his most stubborn, violent and unorthodox operatives. He had stripped them of their glowing ceremonial halberds, handed them heavy matte black boarding armor and aggressive kinetic weaponry, and forged them into something entirely new. They were the vanguard. When smugglers took hostages, when Outer Rim warlords got too bold, when the elegant, civilized rules of Aurelian warfare failed, Cole kicked the door down. "They fear you, you know," Lucy said softly, looking out over the glowing city. "The syndicates, the fringe lords, the rumors of the human cyborg who rips dreadnoughts apart with his bare hands have spread to every corner of the spur." "Good," Cole said bluntly. "Fear keeps people honest. Fear keeps the Outer Rim quiet." He looked down at her. She was growing up. The terrified, shivering girl in the oversized jacket was gone forever. She was a ruler now carrying the crushing weight of 300 star systems on her shoulders. But when she stood here on this quiet balcony, holding on to the railing, he still just saw the kid he had bled for. "I received a transmission from Transit Hub 4 today," Lucy said, her voice dropping to a quiet whisper. "They are clearing out Sector 4, tearing down the old bulkheads, building new heated shelters for the dock workers. They are renaming the Central Plaza," Cole frowned. "What are they renaming it? Decker Square?" She smiled, looking up at him. "The local foreman insisted. He said you owed him 2 shifts, but he was willing to call it even." Cole let out a dry, raspy chuckle. He rubbed the back of his neck, the thick carbon weave beneath his skin flexing smoothly. "Tell him I'll pick up a weekend shift if he pays time and a half," Cole muttered. Silence stretched between them. It was a comfortable, heavy silence. It was the silence of a war that had been decisively won. "Do you ever miss it?" Lucy asked suddenly, her golden eyes searching his scarred face. "Earth, your home." Cole looked up at the stars. The sky was thick with them burning bright and cold in the black void. He thought about his cramped hab unit. He thought about the backbreaking labor, the miserable food, the absolute crushing loneliness of being a nobody in a universe entirely indifferent to his existence. He looked back at the Empress of the Aurelian Empire. He looked at the massive, peaceful city below. He felt the heavy, reassuring weight of the gun on his hip. "No," Cole said simply. "I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." He wasn't a hero. He didn't believe in destiny or fate or the grand design of the universe. He believed in doing the right thing even when it cost you everything. He had taken 7 bullets in a dirty, rusted alley, and he had woken up in a galaxy that desperately needed a shield. Cole finished his coffee, set the empty mug on the stone railing, and turned back toward the heavy glass doors. "Come on, kid," Cole said, holding the door open for her. "Charles is probably having a panic attack wondering where you are. Let's go run an empire." If Cole's brutal, unapologetic rise from a gritty dock worker to the terrifying Lord Commander of the Vanguard kept you on the edge of your seat, smash that like button. Right now, share this epic HFY story with your friends to show them what humanity is truly capable of when our backs are against the wall. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss another incredible sci-fi adventure. Let me know in the comments, would you wield an Aurelian energy halberd or stick to Cole's heavy kinetic slug thrower? See you in the next video.